Hi everybody, it's Sally here, and today I'm going to talk a bit about punch cards and specifically how to punch your choice of pattern onto a blank card. This always seems to throw up a few questions, and some aspects of it are a bit puzzling to the new knitter. So I thought I would try and explain it so that you'd understand what you need to do and why. So first of all, I'll look at the cards that actually come supplied with your machine. If you've got a punch card knitting machine, it usually comes with a set of 20 patterned cards. And once you've got the hang of doing a bit of stocking stitch, we all jump in feet first and try to do some pattern knitting, because after all, that's why we got a punch card knitting machine, isn't it? You want to be able to make these fantastic patterns on there. And then you realise that actually pattern knitting isn't quite as straightforward as plain knitting, but you get there in the end. And then after another few weeks go by, you think, oh, these 20 cards are a bit boring, I want to make my own. Okay, that's fine, that's perfectly possible. So the punch cards that come with the machine, you usually get 20, and most of them, well, they're all numbered to indicate the different patterns, and most of the ones that come with the machine are double-sided, which is not often the case with the blank cards that you buy, so that you can use the card that way up, that way over, and then it's got letters down here, A, B, C, D, so you can turn it upside down and use it that way up. Whoops, excuse me, that way up and that way up. Now the A, B, C, D notification on here really usually only is relevant if you're knitting a single motif. So let's find a motif card. Here he is, the famous silver reed teddy. And there's his, put in there so you can see him. There's his A view. I turn him upside down, that's C. Turn him over, that's D, and turn him around again, and that's B. So these letters will give you an indication of which way up and which way round your bear or whatever other motif it is you've got. Could be a car or another kind of an animal or a flower or something. If the way it appears that way or that way is important, then you need to make a note on when you're punching your own blank card of which way around it needs to go. But that's just to tell you why those letters are there. Most cards obviously are geometric, like these, and it doesn't actually really matter which way up it goes or which way round. So you got your punch cards that come with the machine, and first thing that seems to confuse everybody is these numbers up the side, because the number 1 is up here somewhere and doesn't line up with the first row of pattern on the card. Everybody wants to know why. Well, this is because the mechanism that reads the pattern and transfers it to whatever mechanism your machine uses, whether it's the drum system or the belt system, the mechanism that does that is down inside the knitting machine. And so you have to feed your card down into the machine so that row 1, the actual first row of the pattern, which is always the first row above these 2 lines of dots here, is connected to the pattern reading mechanism. And on a silver reed machine, that will be 5 rows down inside, which is why the 1 appears up here against row 6. So there it is against the 6th row. And on Brother and Toyota machines, it's 7 rows up. That's why there's a difference between the two systems. The silver reed uses the drum system, where you've got spinning drums on the back of the carriage, and it connects with that grey pattern reader on the back of the machine. And the Brother and Toyota machines use a drive belt system that you can see at the back there, a metal belt that's got holes in it, and it connects to their pattern reader system. But the number of rows down inside the machine at which that happens is different between the two systems. And so when you come to punching your own card, you don't want to be starting your punching up where it says 1 on the side of the card. You should be starting your punching immediately above these 2 rows here. So what are these 2 rows? Well, the card is designed to carry on repeating continuously. And so the idea is that you roll it over and join it into a loop when it's inside your machine. And those 2 rows of holes at either end of the card are designed to overlap. They don't overlap each other, they overlap the next 2 rows up and the next 2 rows down. And this is what these 2 holes on the side here are designed to do. They line up, and then you put your card clips in, clip it together, and then these ones, obviously the numbers number continuously up the card, so you can see it goes 55, 56, 57, there's the join, 58, 59, 60, and back to row 1. And that's what the 2 fully punched rows of holes are for. And when you make your own card, you have to replicate those 2 punched rows of holes as well. So that, I hope, will explain the difference between the numbers up the side and why they aren't the same on every card you get. Now, most brands of card are interchangeable between the machines. The exception generally is lace cards, because the 2 lace systems work completely differently. But certainly Fair Isle patterns, tuck patterns, slip stitch and thread lace and all those things, you can happily use a brother card on a silver reed and vice versa. Many years ago there were some Toyota machines where the way the machine read the pattern was reversed. And so what would be a background on a silver reed became the foreground colour on a Toyota, but I don't think there's very many of them around. So unless you specifically know that your Toyota machine is one of those, again, generally you can use brother and silver reed cards on your machine. If you ever pick up a pack of ancient Toyota cards, it will quite quickly become obvious that the background and the foreground have been punched in reverse. So just a thing to keep an eye out for. But yeah, so you've decided you want to punch your own card, and so off you go and buy some blanks. Now I've been buying blank cards for about 40 years. They are all the same size, so it doesn't really matter which you get, but again, you just have to be aware of this numbering system up the side. This is a silver reed card. Now, silver reed cards generally are red. Brother cards generally are blue, and Toyota cards generally are green. There are some exceptions to this, so that's why I'm saying generally they are these 3 colours. And there's my silver reed card. Again, you can always tell which is which just by looking to see where this number 1 appears up the side of the card. If it's on the 6th row, 5 rows up, in other words, it's a silver reed 1. Whereas if you've got, this happens to be a green one, as if you've got a green one, it's 7 rows up. And if you put the cards side by side, you'll see the difference, but put them over the top of each other and you can see they are exactly the same size. There's actually a tiny marginal difference in that green one. It's a weeny bit wider. I've also got some blue ones here, which are brother cards. And again, the row numbering, the number 1 is 7 rows up on the brother, 5 rows on the silver reed. But the cards themselves are exactly the same size. I will talk in a little while about machines that aren't 24 stitch repeats, but for the 24 stitch cards you can use any of them on your machine. Just be aware of this numbering difference. Right, so where are you going to get your blank punch card pattern from, or the one you want to make for yourself? Is it going to come out of a magazine? Is it going to be something you want to draw up in your own head, or have you bought some templates off of the internet, for example? Many years ago, Knitmaster produced, I had a set in my hand, produced these sets of templates. Now, these are not punched cards. It's if you see these handy punch pattern sets, they're not punched cards. but they are full-size replicas of the cards for you to punch yourself. Now, the general idea was that you laid your card over the top of this and then punched through both of them. I think it's a bit of a shame because then it wastes the template and you can't use it again. But if you lay your card over the top of it and maybe just tape them together, I don't know if you can see that, you can actually see the pattern through the little holes on the blank card. So you can then mark it off with a pen and punch it. I've got a little bit of a waste piece of card over here, so I'll show you how I would do that. I've got my Sharpie pen, very useful, and I would lay my card over the top of it, and then where I can see the black holes coming through, I'd mark it with my Sharpie. And then I can punch it out, lift it off and punch it out, and that way it keeps the template intact. So these full-size templates really are, very useful, as you don't have to do any measuring or counting or anything like that. You can just lay your card straight over the top and mark it through. However, if you haven't been fortunate enough to do that and you want to copy something out of a magazine, it probably isn't going to be the same size as the punch card. Now this is Machine Knitting Monthly magazine, so I've just pinched it out of here. There's actually quite a nice little border pattern, so I'm quite happy to mark up a card for that. And if I could, I used to have a photocopier that enlarged, but I don't have it anymore. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to squint at this, and as I'm waiting to have cataract surgery, my eyesight's not at its best at the moment. But again, I would take a Sharpie pen, and I would just then have to very carefully count and mark. So obviously, geometric patterns are much, much easier to copy. Abstract ones, not so much. So this one here, there's 2 blanks and then a mark, 3 blanks and a mark, 3 blanks and a mark. So I would go across each row, 2 blanks and a mark, 3 and a mark, 3 and a mark, 3 and a mark, 3 and a mark, and 3 and a mark. And then on the next row, it's a space and then 3 marks, 1, 2, 3, space and 3, and 3, and space and 3, and space and 3. And I find that by doing this, I have these bits of black paper to lay my cards on. It's much better to mark your card out first and then punch it, rather than just try and punch it directly from watching the pattern. I mean, if it was very, very symmetrical, like a bubble tuck or something like that, I might go straight in without marking it all up first, because it's usually just maybe 4 or 8 rows of a very repetitive pattern. So once you punch the first few, it's quite easy to see where you're going. So on the next one, there's a gap, and then it's a repeat of the second row. That's going to be interesting to knit, because you've got one blank row in between. And then it repeats row 1 once more. So there we go. You've marked your card, and now comes the time to actually punch it. Now, I prefer this brother punch because I don't know if you can see underneath here, it's got a little locator pin. And this locator pin is designed to engage with these tiny little holes that are punched on these cards, so that you can locate where the hole should go, and you can feel it click in there. And actually this punch won't punch if it's not in the right place. If I put it on the edge and try to punch it where there's no hole, it won't punch. So then I just repeat punching my holes. Some people hate punching cards. I actually find this quite therapeutic. It's sort of like mind-numbingly boring. so you can let your brain wander whilst you're doing it. So then after you've punched it out, you can lay it on your card, black card, and make sure you've punched out the right pattern. So now say you have an absolute disaster and punch a hole where you don't want one to be. So let's punch a hole there. Oh no, I didn't want that to be there. Now my preferred method of repairing it is to take one of the little discs, which are now going to fly everywhere, out of the bottom little reservoir on the puncher, get a piece of magic sellotape. It's this sort of white semi-opaque tape. You can use ordinary sellotape. I just happen to have magic tape here. Pick up one of the holes and stick it onto the sellotape, and then put it back into its place. So there it is, repaired. And then I would stick on the back as well. Can't even see where it came. Oh, there it is. Now, of course, that means that the holes in the card have now been covered up. So if you need to punch through any of those spaces that have now got sticky tape over them, I just get a big pin and poke a hole through it. See that? I'll just poke a hole and poke a hole through there. Obviously you only need to do it where you're going to punch, but then if I need to go back and punch where the tape is, if I poked a hole in it, my punch will still work. There we go. So that's how I mark and punch a card. Now, some of the older packs of blank cards used to come with these nice little grids inside them. These are quite good because they are actually they're not squares, they're actually calibrated to represent the rectangular shape of a knitting stitch. So, and this grid here is marked out to be the same size as a 24 stitch and 60 row card, so you can use this here to draw out your own patterns. This is one I did. It's actually a really long card. It's 76 rows, but I was trying to copy it off of a tiny picture that I picked up off of Pinterest, and so I was able to draft it out on here and then copy it onto my punch card. I always find it much easier to, you know, draft these things out and then mark the card and punch, rather than try to jump straight in and punch the card. I mean, not outrageously expensive, but you don't want to waste too many of them, so it's just a bit of a shame. So there they were. So that leads me on to what happens if you've got a pattern that is more than 60 rows long. Well, you can, I think, still buy punch card in a roll, but it doesn't have any markings on it at all, so you have to write all your row numbers on it. And it's also, this is a different material to the cards I've got, and it seems stiffer and a little bit more brittle, so I don't know how it would last the years. I mean, some of the punch cards I've got in my kit I've had since I first bought my machine back in the 1980s, and they're still perfectly okay. Even the ones that have got sellotape repairs on them, they're fine. But yes, you can buy punch card in a roll. But if you haven't got punch card in a roll, what do you do? Well, the answer is that you have to overlap two cards. So here's a second card. And I would actually then probably join it with clips. And carry on punching or marking and punching my pattern up through the second card. So then if you've got a punch card that isn't 60 rows long, or is more than 60 rows long, when it gets to the point where your pattern has finished and you want to trim the card, remember you've got to add these 2 rows at the top for the overlap rows. Remember to punch those out before you cut your card. Now, the one thing I have noticed with some of the blank cards I bought recently, the older ones I've got have got these, where's it gone? It's this one. Have got these holes for joining with the clips all the way down the sides, but the newer ones I've got don't. I don't know if you can see that, the difference with that. It's only got these 2 holes at the top. So it means that if you have to trim your card short, you'll need to line up the top of the card, mark where the overlapping holes go, pinprick them and then punch them. And you must do that extremely accurately, because if the card isn't joined very precisely, it will miss pattern in the machine. I know this to my cost, because the first one I didn't get it spot on, and it didn't line up terribly well. So I've got several different, as I showed you earlier, several different blank types of card, and I am saving the ones that have got holes all the way down the sides for patterns that aren't 60 rows, which is also quite fortuitous, as these are the ones that have got the Toyota and the Brother numbering system. So if I'm cutting a card for my silver reed on one of these and it isn't 60 rows long, I just cut another 2 rows of holes across here and chop the bottom off, and then my number 1 is in the correct place for reading 5 rows in instead of 7. And but if you need the full 60 rows, the other thing you can do is you can start punching your pattern on the 3rd row up from the bottom, and then when you get to the other end, the last 2 rows of the pattern, you can punch on the first 2 down here. So when you overlap it into a continuous circle of 60 rows, again, if you start on 1, it'll just carry on reading round to row 60 on your silver reed. I hope that makes sense. But that's what I do with mine. So the other thing to note is that at the tops and the bottoms of these cards, they've got little notches cut out of the sides. This is to top and bottom, and this is to facilitate, when you join them into a circle, the positioning of the clips. So when you put the join together and clip it, there's these little notches here which gives the clips space to feed through the mechanism. So if I have to cut my card short, I will also cut those little notches out so that I can clip it together. So I hope that has answered your question about, the numbering up the card and, how you can punch your own patterns onto cards. The answer to it really is just take care, look very carefully at what you're doing, and to mark it first rather than jump straight in and try and punch. As I say, I use these Sharpie pens, and if you make a mistake, I've got one of those Tipp-Ex mouse things that's like white tape in like a little dispenser, then you can literally just Tipp-Ex over the top of it and you don't notice it. If I've taken the pattern out of a magazine, I'll write on the card just using a normal permanent pen. This is a fine tip pen. I can mark on it where I got it from. And some cards have numbering up both sides, some don't. This has only got it up one side, so there isn't really any need to mark which is the top and which is the bottom, because obviously I'm only going to put it in with the numbering on this side. But this one has got numbering up both sides, and so I would mark that this is B for the bottom. If you can see that, I've written a B for the bottom, and then up here I'll just put T for the top, so that I know bottom and top. So the cards you punch yourself tend not to have numbers and grids and things on the back. They're one-sided only. But you don't really need it for your own cards. Now, I did say I would talk a bit about non-24 stitch repeat cards. Now, over the years, I have owned every variety of punch card that Knitmaster Silver Reed made. I've had a fine gauge machine, which is a 30 stitch repeat. I've had the HK 160, which is an 18 stitch repeat. I've still got my SK 155, which is a 12 stitch repeat, and obviously the 24 stitch SK 280. Now, I can personally attest that the cards for all of these machines are still all exactly the same size. For the 12 stitch card, it's really quite an easy transition, because it's exactly twice the gauge of the standard gauge machine. You can sometimes still buy 12 stitch cards, which are like these, and they obviously only have 12 rows of locator holes across, and then because they've only got the numbering up the one side of the card, you know that if you punch it like that, it's going to be in the correct orientation. Because the 12 stitch repeat machine works just by taking every alternate tooth out of that patterning drum, it creates obviously a space here, 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 and right the way across. And so these 12 holes across here aren't centered on the double column, which would be 2 holes on a 24 stitch card. If I put this one over the top, they're actually to the right of it, not in the middle where the green line would be. So you need to make sure when you're punching a 12 stitch card, if you can use a 24 stitch blank, they are exactly the same size, but you need to start in the bottom right and use alternate columns. Now, the latest version of the 12 stitch card that I got from Silver Reed has these natty stripes up it. So it doesn't really matter which way up you choose to punch it, because this has got numbering up both sides. But whatever you start on, if you start on a white stripe or a pink stripe, just stick to that stripe and just punch in those columns. Somebody did point out that you could actually, if you were clever, put 2 patterns on here, one in the white columns and then turn it up the other way and do one in the pink. But I actually think trying to punch that out would be a blooming nightmare. So I would just suggest you stick to one colour or the other. Doesn't matter which, as long as you're consistent. And then you can use that for your 12 stitch pattern. So if I turn it up that way, you can see they're both the same size, whichever way up they go, and it doesn't really matter which way round. And so coming now to the 18 stitch card, they're very rare. I found it extremely difficult to get hold of blank 18 stitch repeat cards when I had my machine. And a lot of people now are punching blanks out using these cutting machines like a Cricut or a Silhouette or whatever they're called, which is absolutely great, because if you've got one of those, there's a template online that you can use to punch out 18 stitch repeat patterns. But there are not very many 18 stitch repeat patterns out there. You have to go searching for them in hand knitting Fair Isle books and things like that. But it's still the same size card. It's just that instead of having 24 holes spaced across, it's got 18. So there'd be 9 on that side and 9 on that side. And the same also goes for the fine gauge card. It's going to have 30 holes across that space. But in the case of the fine gauge card, because those holes, you've got more holes to fit in the same space, the holes on the fine gauge cards are actually smaller. And so if you want to get a punch, to punch your own cards, you have to get a fine gauge punch, because this is too big. And if you punch using a normal punch across a fine gauge card, the holes will all merge into one another and the machine won't be able to pattern properly. So just make sure you get a fine gauge punch if you have a fine gauge machine. So I think that's all I need to say on this subject. I hope some of this information has been helpful to you. But if you've got any questions, please post and I'll do my best to reply. Thank you.